All right, I'm very happy today with our guest. We have Darlene Newman. Darlene has held many leadership roles in Fortune 500 companies, 25 years experience. I met Darlene when she was at DTCC, which I'm going to let Darlene explain that in a minute, but it's one of the largest, I mean, absolutely phenomenally large transaction company out of New York, where Darlene led the AI strategy. Darlene, what was the title there that you had?
I was head of internal research and innovation. So I led most of all of our innovation around internal operations, client experience, things like that. But also when ChatGPT came out, we worked quickly to put together a steering committee, build an AI enablement team, prioritize what is our strategy, and I was spearheading that entire effort.
Super. And prior to that, where were you? You've got a pretty long experience.
So DTCC, I was there for a number of years. Before that, I was at Reckitt, Benckiser. Now it's just Reckitt. During COVID, when all the drugstores shut down, everything was contactless. So I was there to lead their innovation, their digital innovation arm for North America. So I helped build out their digital factory, worked with the brands to kind of accelerate getting things out to the door and innovating much faster. And prior to that, I was at Estee Lauder helping with kind of some of their innovative initiatives as well around kind of digital learning, virtual try-ons, clienteling systems.
Well, some people might not be familiar with Reckitt, but what are some of the brands that Reckitt has in its umbrella?
So Reckitt had some very unique brands that were very interesting around COVID. Lysol, Mucinex, Airborne. So they really did benefit from when COVID took off, especially Lysol. Lysol had a number of partnerships with like Delta Airlines and schools. So they really do. They also have Enfamil, so they have a nutrition arm, but they had a number of brands around the health and wellness of individuals.
Okay, super. And then let's go back to DTCC because when I first met you, this is what, about 2 years ago, my first conversation, I met your team, everybody's on the phone, senior VPs, and we're introducing our company to you. And you quoted some transactional facts about DTCC. I got off the call and told my partner and a couple of my team members that were in a room that has got to be hyperbole. And then I looked it up. So, can you explain a little bit about the type of volume and transactions that DTCC
Yeah.
processed?
So DTCC is probably the most important company I would say in the US at least, in the financial world, right? It holds up the capital markets. Most people don't know it. DTCC stands for Depository Clearing and Trust Corporation, or Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation, right? But it basically, if you are to, let's say, buy Apple stock off of E-Trade, what they do is they guarantee that transaction under the surface. So they transact roughly 2.5 quadrillion. I don't even know how many zeros it is, like 10, 13. I have no idea. $2.5 quadrillion worth of transactions a year. So I think we were calculating it somewhere around 44,000 transactions a second is really what that would equate to, if not more. So they really are one of the safest, most resilient and secure platforms out there because imagine if DTCC went down and traders couldn't trade, you have a run on the bank, right? So it is a pretty solid company, but most people don't know about it, and they should.
Yep. So I looked it up and I did the math and that's the gross domestic product of the US every couple of days. So it's just
Yep.
it was a phenomenal. Well, we're here today to talk about AI, the rise of low code, integrating those things into the environment, and it's a it's a tsunami heading
Yes.
everybody's way. You've been involved in AI as an early adopter and not just in theory but in practical applications for DTCC, so some major risk factors. So let's talk a little bit about this. And can you describe briefly your journey in AI and how it intersects?
So if you think of what AI is, right? A lot of people, it's a robot. No, it's taking historical data to predict the future. So I'm looking at historical data and I'm going to try to find correlations or patterns in it. One of the first, I would say, algorithms, you could call it early AI, whether people would say yes or no, was in the 90s. Was migrating a mainframe application to a client server application. And so we were creating, it was for a juvenile justice system, right? We were creating court reports. And one of the things about a court report is you had to have 2 lines of text with the signature on the last page. Well, when we were migrating, we didn't realize that all our dynamic wanting to be able to have more fields and data put in, that it kind of made those court reports dynamic, where in the COBOL world they weren't. And so we had to actually predict where to put a page break. And this was like early in my career, first job out of college. And so I was thoroughly impressed with the developer who thought of like what to do. He basically took all the ways of which something could be written, all the letters, and basically wrote a model that said, okay, based on, all of these letters together, let's predict where it's going to break off in this one today, right? So from that point on, I really just kind of stayed in data. Worked on one of the first music recommendation engines that was based on sound and audio, right? To recommend data across, or music across regions. So if I was in the Philippines, I might get something recommended to me from, let's say, South Africa, right? Where typical recommendation engines were really based on what my friends like, what I like, what I've been listening to. If I'm listening to the same type of music all the time, then I'm going to get that kind of recommendation. So did some work around that, early NLP, and then coming into like even Estee Lauder's Mac Virtual Try-On. Think about facial recognition. Or we used, at the time, OCR to recognize bottles, to provide beauty advisors within the store kind of quick information about a product by just taking a picture of it. We did both OCR and image recognition, trained models based on images that they had in their database. So been in AI quite a bit throughout my career. And so when ChatGPT came out, before that, most organizations really struggled with AI, right? You'd hear leaders go, well, I don't know, I don't see the value because the data's complicated, it's not clean. When that came out, the world changed, and you couldn't go fast enough to adopt. But some of the same challenges exist. Data cleanliness, things like that. But yeah, I look at what's happening with AI, coding, being able to have pair programmers, low coding, being able to put into a prompt that I want a word cloud based on these RSS feeds, and it can create kind of trends reports for me. The world is changing, and it's shifting very much to the front of the office.
You mentioned low code, so you see AI and low code kind of on a convergent path.
Yeah, if you think of low code, you think of, okay, Salesforce is low code, Oracle has some low code, but it's still very much embedded on their platform, right? You still have to have an Oracle person, you still have to have a Salesforce person. If you think about what's happening with low code now, you have full stack development that you can do as a person, just drop and drag. Still takes a little bit of expertise, so still requires some developers to be there. But think about it now where it's like I could literally prompt question and have it build something for me. Right now, you're giving even more capabilities to people who are not developers. Not saying that developers are going away by any means, but it's shifting what needed to be developed by an IT organization out to those that have never been able to do this before, right? You've always kind of had to wait for IT budget. You always had to wait for, prioritization. Is someone available, right? I always had to have a front end, middleware, back end developer, right? Now it's like, okay, can I use low code with AI to prompt that I need an API built? Or can I even have API document and have the prompt read that document and create the API on its own? Right? So low code and AI are almost synonymous in many ways, or getting pretty close to it.
So when you mention, well, this idea of, for lack of a better word, democratization of development, pushing this out to super users, business owners, it seems to perhaps have some inherent risk in it. And can you touch on that a little bit?
So one of the things that I did at Reckitt when we came in. It was about the speed. Digital capabilities are just coming out left, right, and center very fast, right? So the brands needed to be able to move fairly quick, right? But having to go through a central governance approval process meant campaigns are being lost. Things like I just want to have a 360 view of my bottle to spin around on the site as something cool for customers to do, right? Those things would have taken 3 to 6 months to get approved. Then it would have to be put on the path for IT. So what we did is we took a risk model of what we did. So I worked with the brands to say, okay, I'll raise money. We'll create a pod ourselves, and wasn't really using low code at the time, but it was using Salesforce tools and some. But I created a pod, which was just a hand set of developers that had different skills. And I worked with global IT, saying, well, if I can work with this team. And I shared, like, based on what a brand paid in, they got a certain number of hours a month to utilize however they wanted. They could use a Salesforce developer, they could use a front end developer, and so if the campaign or the capability we were putting out there had some form of, let's say, PII data, that was where global IT got involved. But what they did is they dedicated an API developer to my team, so that because you think about it, the one thing that needs to be protected in all of these capabilities is the access to the data, right? Through APIs on the site. So making sure it was secure enough to come through. So we were able to speed up literally approvals of innovation. We were able to speed up development of certain things. And it still felt like IT was controlling it because I was technically part of IT, but I was closer to the front with the brands. So they were my clients, and it just helped streamline a lot of things. We got things, I think it was like 75% more projects complete, 50% faster time to market. Just things are starting to move closer. And even now I look at it going, gosh, my development team could be smaller because now I could give some of those capabilities to the brands themselves. Like, I just want to create a page, right? I want to repurpose the same fields I used in my last campaign. It's connected to an API. They should be able to build it, use an API. It already has a security involved. So I look at low code not necessarily being more risky. I think it puts more standards and structure around development because you're putting it out to the front, right? So now IT needs to have more governance controls that are more automated, right? Versus how many governing approval processes are very manual, right? You have meetings after meetings, but nothing's really automated. Now you get to a point where you start to automate a lot of these things. And AI can help with looking through code, seeing if there are security issues. It can also help out in that area.
So if I'm Mr. CIO this morning, and I'm thinking through, all right, there's so much I can do. You look at AI, you're reading all the things in the press, it just, managing data, managing back-end IT processes, helping in development, front-end concierge services for customers. There's so much I can do. Where would you start? What's your recommendations for evaluating a good place to start? Let's say I have very little. I've got some AI that's embedded into products I bought, like Salesforce, like, whatever, ServiceNow. Well, where do I start with this?
On low code, or in terms of, like, let's think through these AI agents, right? Whatever I do, if I'm looking at AI, even some low code tools, we're still nascent, right? Some of these things are really nascent. And I'm not talking about the Oracles and the Salesforces of the world. I'm talking about like the Flutterflow, or, the writer.com, like all these tools. Start internal, because the last thing you want to do is put something that's still nascent and still being matured out in front of the customer, right? So where do you have data that's ready, right? Because you can't just put an LLM on top of, let's say, your client customer database and go poof, it all can search everything accurately. It still needs to be, the metadata needs to be there, right? It needs to understand it. It needs to be cleaned, right? So I would look at, some of the best places I see where use cases are happening with AI and low code are around the marketing sales, right? If you think of generative AI, which is it's on fire right now, right? It's really good at going through unstructured data. Not as great going through structured data unless it's in better shape, right? but it can go through unstructured data. It can kind of help summarize things. It can help create content. You could put your content into what's called a vector database or a RAG database to be able to have it like default to that instead of just, so it uses your own data as it's generating. So look at marketing as one of the key places, right? I want to do personalized content. Well, let's go through some of our data about our customers. What kind of personas are there? What should we be doing? Can it recommend certain personalized content? Because if you think about it, it's really good at generating content. So let's say I have one white paper I've written. I can now have it generate the LinkedIn posts, the social media posts, everything around it, and still keep the same context, right? These are easy, low hanging fruit. Then if I want to go into, okay, well, how do I use agentic AI in terms of, let's say, my workflow, right? Well, let's start with what's your process where you've got the most manual intensive activities, right? So let's say I'm going to use Marcom. I do RFP writing, right? Very manual intensive. Could I load all of my past RFPs, a lot of our documentation into a RAG and start having, and then put inside my prompt what the RFP questions are and have it start generating it based on what I've written before? That will help you, right? Then it's like, could I connect to another agent to say, okay, can you put this into, let's say, RFP database, right? So you start working through some of these very manual intensive efforts where you create content, right? Because that's what generative AI is useful. You start going through, what I would do is start going through your kind of your value chain of how you do certain activities and start thinking through what's low hanging fruit, risk adverse, where there's going to be a human in the loop to check it, right? I'm not going to throw these things in front of customer support right away, because if I'm handing it to a client and it's getting the wrong answer, I don't have anybody there to check it. But could I start with a chatbot on internal customer support? Because before I answer that client, I can make sure that answer is correct. Yes. So start thinking through kind of the early low-hanging fruit of your use cases. I would start finding out, kind of we did this at DTCC, do an enterprise-wide kind of survey of like, where could I, or where do you think AI would be the most useful and what use cases that, and start aggregating those use cases, right? Then start looking at those use cases by capability, right? So 20% of my use cases are on summarization, right? Some of them are in kind of digging deeper into databases, so intelligent investigation, right? Group them by those capabilities, because in some cases, certain tools, one tool can handle a number of use cases together, right? Summarization is a key one, right? I want to summarize my email. I want to summarize my presentation. I want to summarize this call, right? Could be one or two tools. It could be not, but like start going through where you do a lot of manual entry and a lot of data is being generated or used to being understand, and start there. A lot of people still are struggling with traditional deterministic AI and how like patterns in data. We'll start with the simple ones, right? You create content. Let's start there. But go through a strategic approach to identifying the use cases, group them by capability, and then prioritize the use cases under those capabilities by what's easiest to implement and what's going to bring the most value, and start POCing and testing your hypothesis with those. The difference is you do need to think long term of like, what's the vision of what you're trying to go to? Because there's a lot of tools that are out there that, let's say you'll see 5 that are around RFP writing, right? You want to kind of be strategic in how you're going about doing this. And so know that, yes, I'm going down this path that agentic AI, low code's coming, but I need to be pretty loose in my implementation of it, where I may bring something on, but then it may change in a year, right? It's not like I'm going to buy a big enterprise tool, implement it, and I'm stuck, right? These are models, right? You're likely going to change models based on the use case. And that's kind of how I look at where you go from and where you start.
So I want to jump into workflows and low code and AI in a minute, but one question. Earlier you mentioned data. We talked about we're very good with unstructured data, very good with dealing with that. But say I want to bring structured data in. Is there a way to approach that with dealing with structured data?
Yeah, so generative AI can handle structured data. What it needs to know what the data is, right? So one of the best use cases that I know we did at DTCC, but also I've heard a number of firms. It's one of the first ones that they're doing. So you have data stewards across the organization, right? That are tagging the metadata on data, so that technically you could put it into a Snowflake, or you could put it into, you could federate your data. Data is a product, right? That was key term the past few years, right? I want to make my data as a product, meaning I want to be able to give my employees or my clients access to the data, and they could search it themselves because it's all tagged and cleaned, right? You still need to do that. We were using AI and generative AI to help us accelerate that process, right? So it was generating descriptions, field names for us, kind of standardizing things so that we could get it ready. That is one area where I know a lot of companies are looking at, well, which data sets do I want to make ready for AI? Because you're not going to do all your data. Think of the ones that are the most valuable, that you need the most. Client data, right? Customer data is a huge one, right? Where you want to know everything about your customer, external information, telemetry of where they're going, products that they've bought, tickets that they've logged, issues that they've had, even things that they don't know, where you're monitoring logs behind the scenes, right? You want to be able to just make that data available, because what a generative AI platform will do is, if you're asking a question about, well, how many clients have bought this product, or whatever question you're going to ask, right? It really needs to be able to understand the different columns, whatever, and create that structured data in an unstructured way to be able to spit back that return. But I would also say, like, don't use generative AI like it's not a one size fits all. So it's not a single large language model that's going to be able to give you really good insights. It should be used as the entry point to a prompt and the exit point of the response, and that you should be using queries, APIs, other deterministic models specifically trained for that purpose. So if I want to understand the churn of a customer, I'm not going to ask Chat, which is connected to my customer data, hey, is this customer likely to churn, or what customers are likely to churn? It's not going to know. So I would use a churn model to predict which customers are most likely to churn. So my relationship management team can go out there and start talking to them, so we don't lose them, right? I'm not going to rely on OpenAI's GPT to tell me that, because it doesn't fundamentally know anything, where a churn model was designed specifically to read customer data on your data and understand what kind of correlations exist. So when it comes to what you implement, don't assume an LLM is going to do it all, right? You don't want it to. You just want it to be the summarization, the prompt, that's what you want it for. You don't want it for mission critical predictions.
That makes a lot of sense. So we've had a sidebar conversation about that. It's the job, what I'm hearing you describe, to know where to go get that deterministic information. You've trained it to know what, go ask here, go kick off this function, whatever it is, and then deliver that almost as an alternative UI. Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Think about it. Right now, I live off of dashboards, right, that are predefined. Right, I can put my own widget up there and I can filter it based on whatever rules I want. But do you need that now, right? Could you ask, hey, every morning, hey, I want to understand let's say I'm in security, what risks happened last night that I need to be aware of, or what kind of metrics? It could just pop up every day for you to show you that, right? And it's not something you have to go in and do. So I look at it like your concept of dashboard goes away, right? It becomes just a prompt that you just ask questions, or you could say, hey, could you just show this to me every day at this time, and pin it there. But it's no longer a predefined widget. I could literally say, could you make me a graph that shows me all the revenue that has come in on this client? Think of fraud, right? Fraud detection. Can I get, let's say, for example, DTCC has all the transactions from all the trades, right? Knows of a fraud. Could it tell me what other clients might be impacted from this that have similar patterns, right? It could just pop up on the screen and tell me, right? Otherwise, I have to have that information always there, and I predefine it. I may not know what I don't know. So you want the AI to kind of tell you what you don't know, if that makes any sense.
That makes sense. So we're running up against almost 30 minutes here. I think what we can do, if you're open to it, Darlene, and I appreciate your time, is we can make this a part one. And then we could form up a part two where we take a look at workflows. And so I'm gonna do an intro for this part two now. Open a can of worms here.
Yeah.
This idea of, you've been reading about it in the press, you've read a couple of companies that are creating workflows using low code, using AI, and creating workflows instead of buying expensive applications for those workflows, especially in a case where they might not be using much of the application except for one or two specific workflows. So in our part two, I think we'll come back, and I think we'll tie a part three in because you mentioned MarTech. So I think we could, if you're open to it, get another 30 minutes there to talk a little bit about AI, low code in the MarTech space. So thanks a lot, Darlene. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate you having me.
All right, thanks.